time for the market analysis, and this week we are having Sam Gishohi, the Business Development Manager at NIC Securities, who will be helping us dissect through the numbers. Many thanks, Sam.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a week where we're seeing the NSE 20 share index sort of edging upwards compared to what we saw last week. This week we're seeing it's actually up from it's at 3,128.76, not yet up there compared to what we saw last week. And what really is happening in the markets?
I think we're seeing a bit of, we still have the foreign sell-offs happening, and that is affecting the market.
Yeah.
And usually foreigners will invest in the blue chips, Safaricom, KCB, Equity, Cooperative, EABL, and those will tend to be the ones that move the index much. We did see two books closures, Safaricom books closure, which was on Friday last week, and we did see KCB books closure on Monday this week. They did a dividend of 1 shilling, I think, for KCB and 1 shilling and 10 cents. KCB's was an interim, and 1 shilling and 10 cents for Safaricom. So usually when the books close, then the activity that was coming from dividend seekers also goes off the market.
Sure.
There's those people who are targeting the dividends. So that you will notice a bit of a slowdown over the last few days.
All right. And this week, Sam, I'm seeing among the top movers, we have, as usual, Safaricom moving 4.17 million shares, Kenol Kobil moving 3.56, Equity Holdings 1.9, KCB 1.4, Kengen 286,000. So really, Sam, looking at these particular stocks we have today, I'm seeing Kenol is the only petroleum company, and of course Kengen. The banks doing pretty well, but what do you have to say regarding the petroleum sector? Of course, the 16% value-added tax, which has been suspended by the courts temporarily, but how will this pan out in the coming days?
Well, I think there's always a lag effect if on something like that happening. So I wouldn't expect the market to react instantly, unless it is something that you expect to affect the operations of a company directly in the immediate term. That said, I do believe that, of course, there'll be more to look at how is it going to affect the volumes that they are able to move. I think Kenol is the biggest downstream distributor of fuel in, I think, East Africa.
Sure.
And so that means that if the volumes that they're moving significantly reduce, and because their margins won't have changed that much because it's just a tax, it's not really going to them, then chances are we could see a bit of a hit on their bottom line. And if that does happen, then investors will, of course, either punish the company. But in the recent past, we've seen Kenol also handle very well the side of expenses. They brought down their expenses. They did a lot of restructuring, and they let some people go and all that. And that in itself has made a more efficient unit, which means that it could also help them to weather the storm if it does come. Yes.
Interesting. And Sam, let's expand the conversation to talk about the top gainers this week. I'm seeing Longhorn Publishers. The stock is up by 20% with a valuation of 5 shillings and 30 cents. And pretty much we understand the CEO is exiting. That is Simon Ngugi, paving way for Wahome, who is acting CEO. And looking at the publishing industry, there's been some sense of shift where there's a deliberate attempt by government to push for digital learning, and on the flip side, investments are being made, and publishers might be looking at better days ahead or not.
Well, I think just like we'd see in the banking sector, it's about who's going digital. So publishers it would do them well to sort of get out of the traditional space and start to move into more digital space, and probably seeing that change at the top. I'm not sure that's the reason, but again, you probably see such changes happening when maybe there's a shift in the focus of what they're doing. That said, I think that the government is also trying to create a way in which they will be doing most of the investment in the content for the schools, which again plays well for the publishers, because then they can source more in bulk rather than all over the place. So if a publisher can position themselves to be the go-to guy, which I think Longhorn has done quite well over the years, then they would be in a good position. They did announce results, so again the market can get excited when they see results.
Yeah.
So I do think that is also something that causes interest in a company.
All right, and let's take a look at the top losers this week, and among them we have TransCentury, which is down 7.59%, and their share price is at 3 shillings 65 cents. And of course TransCentury is a stock worth looking at. It was too early to write it off, and there seems to be some positive sentiment around this particular stock.
Well, I think at the moment I'm not reading too much into the numbers of the top gainers and losers, primarily because if you look at the constitution of those top gainers and losers, you will see that they are not very large companies, meaning that is primarily retail, local activity happening. So it could be very speculative. That said, I do accept that, depending on what information is out there, what they're doing. If they, for example, I think TransCentury does a lot of civil engineering stuff, and if those contracts would come out. But again, when the government is not spending, then it would probably hurt them. So I think such sentiments would move the stock in a certain direction, depending on what investors see in it.
All right. Many thanks for that amazing insight.
Thank you so much.
Well, let's now take a quick look at Markets 101 for this week. Well, it's now time for my favorite segment, and that is Question on the Street. Let's take a listen in on this week's question.
My name is Bill Jordan Madzani from Trans Nzoia County. I'm really not conversant with what happens at Nairobi Stock Exchange. I would like to know, what is share trading?
Share trading can be a bit complicated, but let me try and get this. When a company issues shares to the public, that is called the primary market, meaning the money that they get goes to the company to finance whatever business they do. But after that, shares being traded or being bought and sold are done on the secondary market, which is run by the Nairobi Securities Exchange in Kenya, and that is where shares exchange hands between shareholders, from one shareholder to the other, based on whatever reason they're buying or selling the shares. And that is share trading. It's simply the buying and selling of shares on the secondary market.